This week in South Florida, Miami-Dade Mayor Carlos Gimenez comes under fire for what he calls missteps. They include an initial county budget that called for a small tax increase to keep libraries open, firefighters on the job, and a no-kill policy at the county animal shelter. But the mayor got pushback on that budget and dropped the tax hike. Now he's taking heat from people who will lose county services and county jobs. We'll ask Mayor Gimenez how he is going to resolve the situation. Plus, DCF gets an interim director. It's Miami attorney Esther Jacobo, who is taking the embattled social services agency in a new direction. You'll hear from her. Stories people are talking about this week in South Florida. Good morning. Glad you could join us. Uneasy lies the head that wears the crown. That is what the king says in Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1, and it's what Carlos Gimenez might be saying these days if he were quoting Shakespeare. The Miami-Dade mayor has been uncharacteristically uneasy, I think, in recent weeks. He proposed a budget for the coming fiscal year with a relatively modest tax increase, about 5%. But it was shot down almost immediately by most county commissioners and many citizens. The mayor then regrouped, quickly went back to a flat budget. Problem is, the flat budget requires more than a dozen county libraries to close, and for 149 paramedics to lose their jobs. The flat budget also forces a severe cutback in funding for the Pets Trust, which got non-binding voter approval for a no-kill policy at the county's animal shelter, and for an ambitious spay and neuter program. The Miami-Dade County budget is still a work in progress. A series of town hall meetings will get underway this week. The first will take place Tuesday evening at the North Dade Library, one of the ones that will stay open. The man conducting that town hall meeting and the proposer of the county budget is Mayor Carlos Gimenez. He joins us live in our studio this morning. Mr. Mayor, great to have you come in. Thank you.
Welcome for having me here.
Mr. Mayor, you have struck me as a remarkably sure-footed politician in your career, somebody who thought carefully, acted, and was generally in tune, I think, with citizens, with the public spirit. You proposed a budget you believed in, then you backed off. Why'd you back off?
Well, because I think I was wrong. There is no stomach in Miami-Dade County for a tax increase. It was relayed pretty quickly to me, and so as the mayor of Miami-Dade County, I have to listen to the wishes of the people. I can be stubborn, or I can listen to the wishes of the people and say, okay, fine, I will now recommend a flat budget with a tax rate that is flat, no tax increases for the people. And then we'll work around the the things that the consequences of that flat budget.
Yeah, you and your staff have been looking at ways very hard now for the past couple of weeks to find money to make the proposed cutbacks less severe. And just on Friday, we reported that the North Shore and Vyrick Park branches of the Miami-Dade County Libraries would stay open in the coming fiscal year. So now what is it? 35 out of 49 branches are going to be open. Will there be more?
We hope so. And so, when I laid out the budget, I said these are worst case scenarios. Go to the fire department, there may be 6 units that are going to go out of service. Right now we're down to 3. No rescue units will go out of service. And then if we do get there's 2 paths that we can go, Michael. We can get a grant from the United States Fire Administration that may allow us to not cut any services at all in the fire department, or we also have the right to open up the wages article of the firefighters contract. And so I think we're going to do a 2-prong approach to see if we can maintain services at the same level. Unfortunately, those 2 things are outside of our total control. In terms of the library, the cuts to the library in terms of its percentage of budget was actually higher. We're now down to, we're going to keep 35 libraries open in different ways. We're developing an app for people to get so that they know what library is open in their area. And we will have a library open in your area every day except Sunday. We're going to be delivering services a little bit differently in libraries. But we're going to try to see if we can get it down to about 10 or 11 maximum. And then hopefully we'll have close to 40 libraries open in Miami-Dade County.
Yeah, I think in fairness, I should point out that last year you had proposed closing some libraries, and virtually every county commissioner said, well, I want to save money, but not my library, not a library in my district. So I'm
well,
not
there's this
saying
old
that
saying, Michael, you know, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, look, the good thing about this, that what's happening is that I know exactly what the tax rate is going to be, the maximum tax rate is going to be for next year. We're about to enter negotiations with all the labor unions. And what we need to have is a sustainable budget. And so knowing what the tax rates are going to be for a foreseeable future, we can kind of we can look into the future, know exactly what our revenues are going to be, and exactly what our expense. I obviously match our expenses to those revenues, and so now that'll give us a clear roadmap with our labor unions as to what it is that we have to get in terms of getbacks from labor in order to maintain those services that the people desire, but also at a reasonable price and at the price that they want to pay.
Well, generally speaking, over the last couple of years, last year particularly, you demanded the unions make concessions and pay other kinds of things and kick in 5% towards their health care, which only seems reasonable, frankly. How many demands are you going to make on the unions when you sit down to work out these negotiations this time?
Well, it's interesting. We still have the issue of the 5% this year, coming up in next fiscal year on August 29th. We will have a meeting with all the commissioners and all the unions, because I want to impose the 5% or continue to impose the 5% on the employees, and they're fighting it. And so now it's up to the commission to decide whether they're going to impose it or not. If they don't impose it, then that means this hole gets even bigger, and so we have other ramifications from that. So I'm hoping that the commission imposes the 5%. But looking into the future, Michael, we did get like $200 million worth of concessions from labor 2 years ago, and that we were able to close a big budget hole 2 years ago, and those concessions, most of them are still going on. So we're going to probably need, not probably, we're going to need those same concessions next year for the next 3 years in order to keep the books balanced. We don't expect major
because property values have gone up, but they're going up slowly.
Absolutely, and what's eating us up, and what ate us up this year, we had the state increased our pension costs to the tune of something like $91 million countywide.
That was imposed on you, on the county.
Absolutely, and also some Medicaid costs. Increased Medicaid costs, another $8 million were imposed on the county. So not only do we don't have robust growth in the tax roll, we have increasing health care costs, we have increasing pension costs, some of which were imposed to us by the state, and we have to take that all into consideration. Next year, we have the national health care law starts to kick in.
Obamacare.
What does it do to us? And you know what? The problem that we have is that when we talk to our experts at Jackson, nobody really knows. And so we have to be very conservative in our estimates, and we have to be very hard and very tough in terms of what we can pay our employees, because we know what the income is going to be, and we know what services we have to provide. At the end of the day, Michael, when I got to choose between the employees and the taxpayer, I'm sorry, I'm going to choose the taxpayer. But that's not to say that we do have a lot of hard-working employees. Work for Miami-Dade County, and they deserve a fair wage. The question is, what is a fair wage? And then also, what about the benefits? And are the benefits a little bit more or substantially more than what the private sector gets?
Yeah, I understand. Mr. Mayor, I think you just made news a second ago when you said that instead of 6 fire units, 3 are going to be shut down. I don't think that's been reported. How have you made that happen? And does that mean that instead of 149 firefighter paramedics, there are going to be half that number who may lose their job?
Like I said, when the whole thing started, these were worst case scenarios. And one of the things that I pride myself on is being a pretty good administrator. And so
you told me you're not a magician.
I'm not a magician, but I am a very good administrator. Okay, and so we had to go back to the fire union, not the fire union, but actually to the department. Say, okay, let's start to whittle this down. And I don't want any rescue units put out of service, because 85% of the calls are rescue calls, EMS calls.
Yeah, there was a letter from
them. And I know a little bit about the fire department, Michael. I've had a little bit of experience in that.
Yes, you started off as a paramedic in the city of Miami, a firefighter. You became the fire chief. Mayor Jimenez, yesterday, John Rivera, the president of the Police Benevolent Association, the union that represents Miami-Dade Police, published an op-ed in the Miami Herald, and he blasted you. He says essentially that you have interfered in the police department. I don't know, since the police director reports to you how you could have interfered, but that's the way John Rivera says it. He also says that you have decimated the public corruption unit in the Miami-Dade Police Department, which has been a really busy unit, by transferring some people out to the FBI. Has that public corruption unit been decimated?
Absolutely not. And what happened was that the FBI came to me and said that for a number of years, relations had been strained between the FBI and Miami-Dade County Police. And so I sat down with the police chief and the deputy director, and I said, look, we really need to have better relations with the FBI. The FBI really came to me because they wanted help in public corruption, their public corruption unit. And so some members of the public corruption unit were transferred to the FBI. And it's very interesting that John Rivera would say that, because 2 years ago, as part of his cost-saving measures, he said, we agree with the mayor's recommendations to move public corruption to FDLE. And so now,
Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
Exactly, because one of the things that I fear is the politicization of the public corruption unit. And so I wanted to make sure that anything dealing with Miami-Dade County, if they were investigating a politician or something inside Miami-Dade County, that it be headed by a different organization, so that no politics would ever get involved in any public corruption that involved a politician or an internal issue at Miami-Dade. So actually, this is very much in line with what John Rivera himself recommended as a cost-saving measure sometime. And by the way, this wasn't a cost-saving measure. This is just a reorganization. Most of it was done by the director. The only thing I asked the director was to have a couple of those, public corruption officials go to the FBI.
I got you. Well, I'm sorry we didn't get to the Pets Trust. I'll invite you back, and you can take up that hot button issue. But Mayor Jimenez, great to have you come in.
Well, remember, we increased Animal Services budget by 40% in next year's budget. So that will handle the majority of what the people want in terms of the no-kill zone.
So it's a beginning on what the voters approved. Okay.
Absolutely.
Carlos Jimenez, great to have you come in. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. All
right. So to come, the interim DCF secretary is Esther Jacobo. She has taken that somewhat thankless job. You will hear from her next.
This Week in South Florida with Michael Putney. Thanks for watching.
This week I had the chance to talk to the new head of Florida's embattled Department of Children and Families. Interim Director Esther Jacobo says she is deeply disturbed by the deaths of 7 children under the care of DCF in recent months, and she has a plan to turn the department around. Too often in recent months, death has been the tragic outcome for kids when DCF failed to protect them from abusive parents.
A child must not remain in a home if they are unsafe, and we cannot make that home safer.
That's the message interim DCF Chief Esther Jacobo is sending to her staff, especially in South Florida, where there has been a rash of deaths, 5 in recent months, of children whose homes were investigated by DCF.
My first task is to make sure that our line staff understands and lives every day the fact that they're responsible for families and children's lives.
One problem Jacobo faces is state law that sets a goal of keeping the child in the home, even if it's risky. Brian Osceola remained in his home despite his mother's drinking problem. She left him to die in a hot car.
Everyone should be asking hard questions about these cases, and no one needs to take offense when you're questioned about what you're doing on a case. And I think that there is a certain reluctance by some to speak up, right? And there's a certain offense some people take when they're questioned. And that, in this business, that cannot happen.
Jacobo is in charge at DCF, but only for 90 days, unless Governor Scott asks her to stay on. Children's advocate Howard Tellenfeld hopes she does.
Even in the wake of some very serious and disturbing deaths, she's opened the books of the agencies, opened the records, and said to the media, to the advocates, to the public, we're going to be accountable.
Esther Jacobo has that 90-day appointment from the governor. She says she's glad to have the job, but undecided about whether she would want it permanently. All right, up next, we will open the mail. And now for the mail, we heard from several of you about Broward Sheriff Scott Israel and his cruise on a $35 million yacht. Lynn Berry wrote to say, "Tell me how I can get one of those cruises for $1,500, please. Sometimes standing behind the law still doesn't make it right." The fact that some politicians don't live in the districts they represent has been in the news lately. Kenya Nelson had this to say, "As a Democrat, I am appalled by State Senator Maria Sachs's flagrant disregard for the law." Senator Sachs, for the record, says she does live in her Senate district, but Local 10's Bob Norman has shown her coming and going from a home outside the district. On the Zimmerman verdict, we are still getting emails. This one was from Daisy B. Penaloza. "The Zimmerman-Martin case was never about racism. The jury was absolutely right in acquitting Zimmerman. This man has been unjustly persecuted, harassed, and maligned by the media." All right, so to come, my personal perspective about the revolving door in Tallahassee. The latest to leave under a cloud is this man, Education Commissioner Tony Bennett. Nevertheless, the governor says he did a great job. Before we leave you this morning, a personal perspective about that revolving door administration in Tallahassee. The latest high-profile figure to leave is Education Commissioner Tony Bennett. He resigned Friday after his own emails showed he manipulated school grades in Indiana, where he was the education chief. Worse, it looks like he did that to please a big Republican donor. That's just plain dishonest. For all his other talents, Tony Bennett had to go. But Governor Rick Scott wanted him to stay. He insisted Bennett had done a great job as Education Commissioner. In much the same way Scott said David Wilkins had done a great job as the DCF Secretary, despite the fact that 4 children in DCF care had died on his watch. This week, I asked the governor about Bennett. Governor, did you fire Tony Bennett or did you ask him to resign?
I talked to Tony Bennett last night. He let me know that he's going to resign. It was his decision to resign. I think he's doing a press conference right now. He did a great job. If you look at the things that we talked about today, we talked about the debit card for the teachers. He was part of that. We talked about the pay raise for the teachers, the $480 million. He was part of that. The $1.2 billion for increasing K-12 education, he was part of that, so he did a great job.
Well, if he did a great job, why is he leaving? Do you believe these allegations about changing grades in Indiana?
Well, he's made the decision to leave, so I'm not familiar with the details.
In fact, the governor says he never read the actual emails showing Bennett manipulated school grades. And by the same token, Governor Scott told me he never heard or watched the video of Jesse Jackson's remarks in Tallahassee, which the governor blasted as divisive and insulting. I asked him how he knew they were. He said someone told him about them. So, on such important matters, why is the governor relying on secondhand information? What's Rick Scott doing that's more important than personally looking into serious allegations of misconduct by a state education commissioner or critical remarks by a national civil rights leader? Lately, the governor has been jetting around the state for ceremonial bill signing ceremonies and handing out Great Floridian awards. He is all about photo ops and good PR. Little bit of that is okay, but the governor needs to spend less time campaigning, more time governing. That's my perspective for this week. Hope you have a great Sunday. Remember, as always, stay informed, get involved. I'm Michael Putney.